Prime Minister and President's meeting is the first one since the election in Canada. It's a high-stakes meeting for trade and security relations. However, Trump seems to be downplaying the importance of this meeting. Meanwhile, his Commerce Secretary outlines how this meeting may just be for show when it comes to trade. And this all raises the question, what leverage does Prime Minister Mark Carney really have? Is he in a strong negotiating position or not a great one? And what effect does the internal struggles and rising separatist sentiment inside of Canada, what does that all mean for the meeting today? Let's get into it.
What's your expectation for your meeting with the Canadian Prime Minister tomorrow?
I don't know. He's coming to see me. I'm not sure what he wants to see me about, but I guess he wants to make a deal. Everybody does. They all want to make a deal because we have something that they all want. We have something that they all want. China wants to make a deal very badly. You see what's happening to China. China's being decimated, and I don't want that to happen.
And this downplaying of the importance of today's meeting seems to be something that is going on throughout the Trump administration, with his Commerce Secretary pointing out that these meaningful negotiations could still be a year away.
I think it's going to be a fascinating meeting. I'm glad I'm going to be there listening, but it's going to be a fascinating meeting tomorrow. I just don't see how it works out so perfectly.
But you're not going to bust up USMCA. That deadline is next year for the final review.
Correct. So next year is coming. So a lot of things are going to be put into that.
So if it's USMCA compliant, you're okay.
I think for now it's okay, but I think what you should expect to see is a real revisiting of USMCA in a year, because Donald Trump, remember what was fun about USMCA, remember when he renegotiated the deal, he wanted an exit clause in 3 years. And they said, no way, we're only going to have a 6-year exit clause because we don't want to negotiate with you. And now the Biden election went the way, with the election getting stolen from our president. And now here they are, negotiating with Donald Trump, and I don't think they're very happy about that.
He's, of course, talking about the USMCA agreement, or CUSMA, depending on which country you're from. You put your country's name first. Same goes for Mexico with the TMEC agreement for Mexico, Estados Unidos, and Canada. But he points out that this trade agreement is set to expire in 2026 and it's set to be renegotiated in 2026. So if we're going to have a meaningful trade talk now, I think many people are thinking that it should involve the reopening of this agreement. Otherwise, what's the point in really getting into the details now if it's all going to be reopened in just a number of months? However, some people believe that waiting will be in the interests of Canada, as Trump could face more pressures as the midterm elections get closer, especially if other large economies like China don't come to some sort of trade agreement with the president. People think that there could be more pressure mounting. So will this meeting be just for show? It's hard to tell, and many are speculating that the Canadian Prime Minister, Mark Carney, has been trying to build as much negotiating leverage as he possibly can. You may have heard about the coalition of the willing in relation to European nations supporting Ukraine in the Russia-Ukraine war. Now, it seems that Carney is turning to similar nations as new options for increased trade, ideally to get leverage going into these meetings. Just scrolling through Mark Carney's X feed, you can see he talked with Australia's Prime Minister about strengthening trade ties. If we scroll down, you can see him talking to the President of the EU Commission, potentially signaling increased ties with Europe. And if we scroll down even further, we hear about these conversations similarly going on with the government of Japan. Now, is this just par for the course calls for a new prime minister, or is this a concerted effort to build a backdoor around the US? And do these nations provide the same market opportunities for Canada? And what amount does geographic proximity play into this? We're going to have to wait and see. But of course, others will point to other terms of leverage, the important resources in Canada, and this is something that was talked about chiefly by the Premier of Canada's most populated province just this morning.
President Trump's tariffs, this guy drives me nuts. I just get wound up. He's sitting there, he drives it. Here I go off my speech. I guess you don't need our high-grade nickel that they use 57% of their nickel to build their military, their aerospace, and manufacturing. Imagine if we never gave them our high-grade nickel. Or my friend Scott Moe out in Saskatchewan, if he cut off the potash, that 87% of the farmers down in the U.S. use Saskatchewan potash. And imagine if they didn't have the uranium. They wouldn't have any nuclear power down there. Or, of course, what would they do if they didn't have our electricity? We have a prime minister down there and he's going to be sitting down and he's going to give it everything he can. This is a time to unite the country, not people saying, oh, I'm leaving the country, or I'm doing this, I'm doing that. You know, united we stand, divided we fall. And we have to be united Canada together to fight President Trump's tariff.
So he points out critical resources that he claims the U.S. needs from Canada. Now, could the U.S. source these types of materials from elsewhere over the long term? Well, just like Canada could go around the U.S. with this coalition of the economically willing, sure, it could be done. But is it as efficient economically as making a deal? I have my doubts, and it seems that Prime Minister Mark Carney will be going in there to try to make some sort of deal. It seems that there will be a continued relationship here, but what that relationship looks like is what we will find out. Now, Premier Ford has become a controversial figure under the Canadian Conservative banner, with a large rift between the federal Conservatives and his provincial Conservatives, two separate parties who have traditionally been aligned, but that has changed. Here's the scathing rebuke of the Premier of Ontario from the Conservative federal MP, Jamil Javani.
Doug Ford just went through an election. I have differences of opinion with him. I don't like how he's managed healthcare or education, but out of respect, we didn't say anything. Federal party, we didn't get in his way. When it was our turn to run an election, he couldn't stay out of our business, always getting his criticisms and all his opinions out, distracting our campaign, trying to make it about him, trying to position himself as some kind of political genius that we needed to be taking cues from.
Do you think he was trying to sabotage your campaign?
We have become a party of dreamers and builders and strivers and hustlers, people who want change. And I don't think Doug Ford represents that. And I don't want him influencing where our party goes next.
In the previous clip, Ford also called out the need for a united Canada to fight the tariffs, directly sort of subtweeting Danielle Smith, who is the Premier of Alberta, the Canadian province where there's the most noise about separating from Canada. Now, just yesterday, she said she doesn't support this happening, with a caveat.
To be clear from the outset, our government will not be putting a vote on separation from Canada on the referendum ballot. However, if there is a successful citizen-led referendum petition that is able to gather the requisite number of signatures requesting such a question to be put on a referendum, our government will respect the democratic process and include that question on the 2026 provincial referendum ballot as well.
So she does leave the door open for a vote on separation happening, though she claims she doesn't support this action. She also outlined 4 key things that a deal between the federal government and Alberta could look like, and if this were to actually happen, it could address the slowing of separation talks. She claims that they need to make sure that Alberta has access to infrastructure that gets their products, their energy products, to all 3 coasts in Canada. They say we need to repeal the legislation that they say is slowing down the ability to build pipelines and scrap all types of carbon pricing. They also say there must not be any export taxes that are put on Alberta and their products from the federal government. And they also say that Alberta should get the same per capita subsidization or equalization payments as other major Canadian provinces. And I found this next part very interesting. She also takes a different approach to unity. While Doug Ford talks about Canada strong, all pulling in the same direction, Danielle Smith takes the approach of validating the concerns of people who may legitimately disagree.
I want Albertans to know how important it will be in the coming months for our province to be steadfast, unified, and to refrain from heeding the voices of those seeking to divide Albertans against one another. There are thousands of Albertans who are so frustrated with the last 10 years of Ottawa's attacks on their friends' and families' livelihoods that they feel Alberta would be stronger and more prosperous as an independent nation. That is an understandable and justifiable feeling to have, even if we disagree on what to do about it. These Albertans are not traitors, nor should they ever be treated as such. They just love their province and family and want a better future than the one Ottawa is offering them right now. There are also thousands of Albertans that are so attached and loyal to their identity as Canadians that there is nothing Ottawa has done to our province that would justify Alberta leaving Canada. It's not that they think everything is perfect or that we've been treated fairly. They just believe being part of Canada, despite those problems, has much more value than leaving. These individuals are also loyal Albertans and should never be accused of being anything less.
This is definitely a different approach from the handling of dissenting and disagreeing voices, validating that reasonable people might disagree on things, but it doesn't make them traitorous or misinformed. Now, if you contrast this to the way the federal government handled protests during the pandemic, regardless of your views on this situation, you can see there's a very different way it's being handled.
The small fringe minority of people who are on their way to Ottawa or who are holding unacceptable views that they're expressing do not represent the views of Canadians who have been there for each other, who know that following the science and stepping up to protect each other is the best way to continue to ensure our freedoms, our rights, our values as a country.
Now, critics of Smith will say that this is to distract from ongoing allegations of a scandal in Alberta's healthcare industry, with claims of contracts being awarded improperly. Now, it's true that this separation talk has taken a lot of the air out of other stories at the moment, but as for the legitimacy of this scandal, we'll have to wait and see how things develop as investigations are underway. But these differences in a concept of what national unity is, well, that really made me interested, and it raises several questions. Is national unity what happens when people soften their strongly held views to be more in line with a single Canada-wide point of view, with any dissenters being framed as not working on behalf of the team? I can see an argument for this. I mean, it's hard to negotiate when there's so much noise. What truly are Canada's interests, and how can you be certain of them when there are so many different and often very contrasting voices? But at the same time, there's something refreshing to me about the idea that national unity doesn't come from a forced point of view, but rather from a willingness to accept that your neighbor might have a different opinion from you, while understanding that that doesn't make them misinformed or stupid or illegitimate. I think reasonable people can disagree. Hell, we're all in our own information and algorithmic bubbles, and it's incredibly challenging to have complete certainty that your worldview is actually the accurate one. I feel like this. So I do think that there's something to this idea of unity being the ability to recognize that differing views shouldn't divide us with animosity. They should make us stronger as we all voice our own opinions and thoughts and try to find out what the truth actually is, as challenging a challenge that might be. I don't know, is that naive of me to think? Let me know what you think in the comments below. What do you think about this meeting between Carney and Trump, this coalition of the economic willing, as I'm calling it, and the controversy within the Conservative Party and within the provinces in Canada? It's a challenging time for Canada right now, both domestically and abroad with many other nations. So subscribe to the channel because we're going to be following all of this with a fine-tooth comb. I'll do my best to synthesize the information I'm getting, and you can use it as part of your way of figuring out what you think is actually going on in the world. So subscribe to the channel. You can get access to the sources for every video by subscribing to the email newsletter with the link in the description. But with all of that said, thanks so much for watching, everybody. I really hope this video helped you out at least a little bit, and I'll see you next time.